You can tell, so from slide 1, they kind of started on the right, which was just about that mechanic, about avoiding obstacles and moving in an environment as a runner. But as they changed it to a collecting mechanic, where you had to collect things as you went along, they found that actually layering the mechanic to the original core mechanic of the movement, as we know it today, made for a much less punishing and a much more satisfying game, with a bit more freedom in it as well. And it's only when they discovered, okay, that's the mechanic we want. It's a mechanic kind of that mixes moving and collecting, a kind of a dual mechanic in a centralized control, that they thought, okay, we have a great mechanic, but how do we apply a story to it? How do we make it YouTubeable? So the YouTubeability came only as a second step to the mechanic, and I think that was key in their success. That's when they thought, well, actually, we could put anything in this, and maybe it's not about collecting, maybe it's about cutting, and cutting grass can be quite satisfying. So instantly, when they started testing the grass element with those physics, what we found, is a game that has strong potential. So we have a 25-cent CPI, which usually means you have around maybe 250 users or 200 users in your game on GA every day. We had a good, strong day 1 retention, as well as a day 7 retention that we could work on. It was fairly weak at 13%, but we knew we had something. The question was, we have strong potential, but given the day 7, do we try to improve the game, or do we make drastic changes? And we decided as a team with Full Fat that small changes here and there, if we applied them carefully, could definitely work out, given all the thinking and the strength in the core mechanic of the game. The result of that was that we decided to simplify the game. As you can tell on this GIF, there is kind of a dual gameplay in the original Grass Cut. One is a bit of a runner between levels, where you're just moving along, but you're not really accomplishing anything. And the other one is you're cutting grass, on every level. What we found is actually one area where we could improve the game was by getting rid of the dual gameplay, focusing in on the most juicy bit, which was cutting grass, and then rewarding people at the end of each level to make sure that they understood that they had accomplished that level fully, and that it was time for the next level. That was on one front. On the CPI front, we felt there was still room for improvement, and that had to do with both the double gameplay, which was confusing, as well as some of the design elements in the original game. So as you can tell, on a second iteration, we improved the metrics by making the game a bit more visually clean. The color palette was more appealing. You can tell the stripes on the islands made for less of a focus on the island and more of a focus on the cutter and the grass. We had still some challenges in the game, but the CPI was improved. The day 7 was improved by giving a feeling of better progression within each level, within each island. You could complete a checkpoint, and so you were rewarded more quickly within each level, even though the levels were technically a bit longer. The second thing that we wanted to focus on was, how do we give the player a better feeling of progression, a faster feeling of progression? So coming back to one of your questions on the live stream, how come we have such long levels on Grass Cut? Actually, if you go back to our second version, levels were even longer, the islands were even bigger, and the walker was much smaller. So with shorter levels, we felt that players would be rewarded more frequently, and that the sense of progression would be coming more frequently in the game. And the second thing is we still felt there was room for improvement on the CPI, and we did try a couple of different themes to see if they would work better in the game. So finally, on the third iteration, we kind of knocked it out of the park in terms of the retention metrics, and we found that actually shorter islands were much more juicy, especially in the beginning. Just making sure that users started off on a very easy island was key, an easy and a small island, so that they can be onboarded much faster and be rewarded faster for a new game initially. by making the color palette a little bit less bright, and all the colors are actually a little bit more aligned. We brought out the walker a little bit more, and our CPI dropped to 18 cents with a similar CPI for men and women. And progression was also optimized with shorter levels and a faster sense of accomplishment, along with that easier user onboarding. So finally, the game actually didn't stop there. So we had strong retention, and we had a pretty good scalable CPI, we thought, but we still felt that with ads, once we did launch the game, and I think it's worth to draw on a couple of the lessons here, there was a way of improving retention. So as you can tell, when we did launch the game with ads, the retention dropped to 50 day 1, 15 day 7, which makes sense when you add commercials, people will tend to play for a shorter amount of time. But we did, alongside full fat, manage to improve the metrics of the game, and I think there's a few key lessons that are applicable to prototypes. So one thing is we focus on continuing to make the game even more snackable and rewarding in shorter snippets. By making the walker, the avatar, a bit longer and more powerful, we were effectively shortening the levels because they're faster to accomplish. The second thing is the walker actually is faster than in the original. The islands are even shorter. All these A/B tests worked out in the game. Also, coming back to another question on the live stream, we made for a more rewarding experience where the fever was much easier to pick up, and that worked well with users. So more frequent fevers, easier to pick up, and more juicy fevers where your walker is even bigger and more powerful. Thicker grass, because that gives you a feeling of cutting that is much greater than with the original design we had. And finally, just continuing on the progression feeling, so a better onboarding with a tutorial at the beginning, a short, easy island with no gaps. We made sure that no difficult islands were called in the first level. And then finally, just on that progression on the zoning, to make sure that each level had a season. It makes you feel like you're evolving in an environment and that you're not getting the same thing over